Hello, welcome back to my channel. Before I forget, please, if you could help me out and give me a thumbs up, that helps with the algorithm. Subscribe, hit the little alarm bell so you can get the videos whenever they come out. I'd appreciate it. Okay, as the name implies or states on my thumbnail, this video is going to be on socialism. It's been in the news. It's something that's interesting to me, and and part of segue to why this is interesting to me is because of the language. I've stated in other videos how over the time in my lifetime, words have changed their meaning. Usually it happens in academia, who should know better, but they change it. And the two examples that I've used in the past are the word race or the definition of racism, which used to be just simply being being prejudiced against someone based on their race. And the other the word which is really surprising, and fortunately this seems like it's going out, is when people ask, what is a woman? Because of the transgender movement. And there the definition was a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. So anyway, I thought that I would start off with the definition of socialism. Now this is in Wikipedia, which is not always the best source. And it's gotten better over the years. Anyway, this is what it states in Wikipedia. Socialism is an economic and political philosophy encompassing diverse economic and social systems, characterized, here it is, by social ownership of the means of production and distribution, but it doesn't state that here, as opposed to private ownership. And the most telling thing here is as opposed to private ownership. In other words, when it says social ownership, as opposed to private ownership is I own my house, I own my car, I own my clothes. But in a socialist system, it's owned, it says here, social ownership. Let me click on what it says when I click on social ownership. Social ownership is a type of property where an asset is recognized to be the possession of society as a whole, rather than individual members or groups within it. And I think it's a good idea to click on it because that's exactly right. It means that I don't own my house. I can live in my house and have some sort of authority to be in it, but it doesn't belong to me, and that's very important. And then it goes on. It describes the economic, political, and social theories and movements associated with the implementation of such systems. Social ownership can take various forms, including public community, collective, cooperative, or employee. That's public, then community, collective, cooperative, or employee. As one of the main ideologies of the political spectrum, socialism is the standard left-wing ideology of most countries. And so that's the definition, and that's the definition I've pretty much I've always known. But today it's misunderstood apparently by a lot of people. And I know I got in trouble with this when I did my atheism videos because I just assumed that atheism was one thing, and then all these people came in and told me that it's not. But then when I looked the definitions up, there were various definitions, and that's fine. I mean, that's on someone how they want to self-identify what their beliefs are. But this one's pretty much the standard belief in the world today, and this would be among the layperson and economists and government people. This is the definition of socialism. It's often misunderstood, and one of the ways that it's misunderstood, some people will say, in the United States, we're socialists. Look, we have got Social Security and we got Medicare, and so they'll say, well, that's socialism. Well, we are a mixed economy. In other words, there are some things that the government takes care of that are huge. I think Medicare takes up a huge part of the national budget, which is a problem. But big companies that do things like build cars and build houses, and those are privately owned. And some people will say, well, they're funded by the government. No, I mean, sometimes they get government money because the government wants to promote something for the social good. But and they're expected to do something with that money, but they have a lot of latitude, and a lot of them are just filthy rich. Apple I'm sure that they get some government money, but they build they're not dependent on the government to fund the iPhones or their products that they make. Cars, the only real American car company left is Ford, and I know they get some government money also, but they're pretty much dependent on the sale of their cars to support themselves. So the United States is not a socialist country. It's like I say, it's a mixed economy. It has some things that the government has gotten involved with, the collective, right? Um, the money that's in the fund for Social Security is in a collective, it's in a big pot. And it's not, I didn't put money in there when I was younger and then I collect from that account. I'm putting money in there that pays for people retired right now and people that are in their 20s. They're putting money in there, but then that money is taken right away and given to people that are retired. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into it, but this is a mixed economy. We are mostly a capitalist country. We believe in what is this here? Private ownership. We own our houses. People that run businesses, even if they're a publicly traded company or a public company and they have shares, one person might or a family will own the majority shares, majority control of the company. And otherwise, they're just wholly owned. I just own the whole thing, and that's the way it is with a lot of companies, especially um, mid-sized companies. There's a family or there's a person that owns a company, and that's across the board in the United States. And like I said, I own my car, I own my house, or in theory, once I finish paying it off, I'll own my house, my car. I've already paid it off. Um, so this is not the United States is not a socialist country. So then people will point to, well, the Scandinavian countries, right? Because they have a national health care, and some of them have nationalized the oil industry. I believe Norway. I think Norway did it, and Sweden, also has, and Denmark. They have big, you know, funding where the education and the healthcare is free. And that's a big. It always stop when people say that it's free. It's not free. You paid for it. I believe that in Sweden, the the taxes, the rate is about 50%. I think it's a little bit more than that, like 51, 52%, something along those lines. And you think, well, that's for the wealthy, right? It probably kicks in at $100,000 a year or $200,000 a year. It doesn't. It actually kicks in right around the $50,000 mark. So if you're making $50,000 a year, about 51% will go into taxes. Okay. And in some places, like um, like Denmark, I believe, maybe not Denmark, maybe Holland. I think that to buy a car, you have to pay 100% tax on that car. So if the car is $20,000, you have to pay $40,000 for that car, and of course you finance it, but very expensive. And they use that money to fund their programs. What they are um, big nanny states, or they have big welfare states. The reason that they're not socialist is because they have very low corporate taxes. They charge people a lot of money. Individuals are paid like 50%, but corporations will pay 15%, 17% taxes. That's lower than the United States. And why did they do it? Because lower taxes for corporations helps them hire. If they have less expense going out, they're able to do more things. And they kind of agree to that. A big part of this is also the culture. Um, One of the reasons that these big networks, these big social programs work so well for so long in places like Sweden is because they were homogeneous. I mean, all the Swedes were the same. Some of them been there for thousands of years. It wasn't until, and it got to a point where it got very expensive, and they were already looking at. In fact, I think you can get private insurance, health insurance, in Sweden, because the other system is, the wait lines are very long, and sometimes the public healthcare system can't afford certain things for you, and so um, they've encouraged people to get private health insurance to supplement some of that or to pay for some of that outright. Also, the education, yes, it is 100% paid for by your tax dollars. So when you go and apply, you don't pay anything, right, at the school that you're going to. However, you have to qualify. And so that's the rub. It's very, very hard to qualify. And depending on what your scores are, you will qualify for certain things. For instance, if you score a certain amount on their tests, you'll be excluded for, say, medicine or biochemistry. You'll be given things like the liberal arts or something else. You have to, so you can't just choose it and then go and do it yourself. Because they don't want the money to be wasted. They don't want you to go, for 2-3 years in chemistry and then change your mind and go do something else. So they're very strict on that. And it was not so much a challenge when, like I said, the population was more homogeneous. It's become very expensive, and so now they're backing off of that as well. Um, so the United States is not socialist, and Sweden and the Scandinavian countries aren't socialist. Mexico is an example of very close to socialism. For a long time, it was very close to socialism. The PRI, which is the ruling party of Mexico, that was ruling for almost 100 years, the um, Institutional Revolutionary Party. That's what it stands for. PRI. And they were members of Socialist International. There was an organization called Socialist International, and they were members. And a lot of it was not quite a real, as the definition says, because they did have some private ownership of some businesses. You could start a trucking company, and it would be yours. But the country did nationalize Pemex, the oil company, the gasoline oil company, is owned by the government. They nationalized it, and for a long time they nationalized a lot of other industries. It was more socialist in the past, but as some companies have gotten bigger and some entrepreneurs have become more wealthy, there's a guy, Carlos Slim, who owns the big telecommunications system in Mexico. So it's a private owner, and it's something that you would think is maybe more like a utility, right? The telecommunications, cell phones, the phone system, but it's not. It's owned by one guy. He actually, I think, a while back, he had bought the New York Times. I don't know if he's still owner of that, but private ownership. And so Mexico and a lot of other Latin American countries, they kind of skewed towards that. Um, they had very, very big welfare states or very top-heavy, government control on a lot of things. But none of them were. These were more like on the spectrum that the U.S. is on, where we have a couple of things. They had more things, and maybe even more things in countries like Sweden and Denmark and so on. They were even more to the left on things like that. But they weren't true classical socialist countries. Socialist countries, let me go back to that definition again. An economic and political philosophy encompassing diverse economic and social systems characterized by social ownership of the means of production and distribution as opposed to private property. And again, social ownership is the type of property where an asset is recognized to be possessed in the possession of society as a whole rather than individual members. So they would say that the house that we live in, is really owned by the state. It's really owned by the. They'll say it's by the people because that's collectivism. The state, the government, is the reflection, or they're the stewards of the needs and the wants and the ideals of the people. Even if people don't want them, that's what they stand for. And they'll have some kind of elections, but usually, and I'll explain why later on. They stay in power forever. So what are examples of socialist countries? There was China, and to a great extent, China is still there. It took a foray into capitalism, which made them a lot of money. I remember when they were going to take over Hong Kong. I thought, they're not going to turn it into a communist port. They're making too much money. And what happened in China is they had a economic system that was classical socialism, where the government owned everything, and people were given quotas. Farmers were given quotas that you make so much. People were hired and they did certain jobs, and everything was kind of like determined for you. There was one child policy, and something happened with some farmers a while back where they grew crops that were required, but then they grew a little bit extra for themselves that they didn't tell the government about, and they used that to barter, and they started making money. And the government, instead of punishing them because they were in such bad shape, they said this is a great idea, and they expanded it. And of course, it became this little capitalist niche that they had that really built them up. And so now, of course, there's a lot of industry there. A lot of it's controlled by the Chinese government, but they're making a lot of money. Anyway, China would have been an example. North Korea is an example. And how is North Korea an example? Well, the state owns everything. Everything that, the jobs, the companies that where you work. Um, I know that in China they used to give you your uniform and a bowl of rice like once a week or something. I mean, it was very structured, and and the collective gave it to the individuals, right? Cuba is another thing, another one. They have no private ownership of businesses. If you own something, they actually made like certain small allowances. I saw this great video called Tank Yanks, where because of the embargo that happened in the early 60s, Cubans had a lot of American cars from the 50s, 57 Chevys, and they stayed there, and they've been keeping them running all this time. I mean, and so they had to like come up with ideas, and they would make like body fenders and circuitry to make the radios work, and all things like that. And the government gave them certain licenses that they could do certain things to keep things going, but they were very minimal. It really was, a socialist country where the government controlled everything. I mean, the government wouldn't even let you leave, like they don't let you leave in North Korea, and like it was very hard to leave in China up until the switch in the economy that they made. But those are true socialist countries. And so, of course, when you mention them to people that love socialism or promote socialism, they'll say, no, 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 that's not socialism. And they come up with a lot of really interesting. I remember reading someone once when they talk about Mao Zedong in China, that they said that he was a communist, right? And the doorway to communism is socialism. That's pretty much the standard idea. But they said that when it didn't work, and it became a totalitarian state. When Mao was the main guy, the chairman Mao, they said he was all of a sudden right wing. It's like, there's nothing right wing about him. Um, there's a certain thing. Right wing means something, right? In this case, um, this was pure socialism. Just that there happened to be uh, one person that kind of like controlled everything, and that's kind of like where this all goes. I think that ideally, in a perfect world, socialists believe, well, it won't be one guy, it'll be all of us, right? You may have like a representative, and they'll go to like town hall meetings, and then those representatives will send somebody to another town hall meeting. And so our needs will be addressed through this chain, and there won't be one person in charge. They might be like a parliamentary board, or, but it always becomes one person. And that's where I would argue that socialism doesn't work. And that's what they would argue, that it's never really been tried. It's like, it's been tried lots of times. Like I said, Cuba, still working there. Nicaragua, there's a guy in charge. Um, North Korea, there's a guy in charge. China, there have been several guys in charge. And this last guy, Xi Jinping, I think his name is, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, all right. And he declared himself president for life. The last guy resigned or died or something, and he took over. He was elected in by the whatever board elected him, and he just declared himself the main guy for life. It always devolves to that. And so they said, well, then socialism's never been tried. And the thing is that it's one of these things where, you guys, you don't notice that it always comes to that. It always comes back to, like, I think Ortega in Nicaragua, and Kim Jong Un in North Korea, and in Venezuela it was it's now it's Madera, but it's the other guy, I can't remember his name. Um, and in China it's Xi Jinping. And why does it always come to that? And they are working socialism the way that socialism was meant to work. Um, the collective, everything belongs to everyone. Although in China they changed that a lot. I think they're going back to their more socialist roots. Um, but the other places, it's all collective. In Cuba, it's all owned by the government. In the Soviet Union, everything was owned by everyone. Remember, I had a lot of friends that and people that will say, well, no, Soviet Union was communist. Like I said, the ideal for these places is communism, but socialism is the pathway to communism. Communism is this utopian idea, and I'll maybe explain it in another video. But when the Soviet Union, it was the USSR, Union Soviet of Soviet Socialist Republics. Okay, they knew that they were socialism, and there was usually a guy in charge, right? I mean, I can remember back from Khrushchev to Brezhnev to Andropov, then to Gorbachev, and then a bunch of people in between. There was a guy that was elected, and he was the main guy, and he ruled usually till he died. Um, that's the way it always devolved. But they were proud, well, they called themselves communists, but they also called themselves socialists. And that's the way that everything was owned by the government. All of them had restrictions on people being able to leave, which essentially was you can't leave. I remember talking to a lot of people that had lived in former communist countries, well, socialist countries, and they would tell me how things work. That I asked one of them, so I guess you couldn't buy, or you didn't have a lot of money. He's like, no, we had money, but there was nothing to buy. The shelves in the restaurant in the stores were empty, and the restaurants, they wouldn't attend you. You'd go and you would wait forever, and until somebody got around to maybe helping you. People used to barter a lot, and it was they hid how poorly their economy was doing. They, the ruble, I think it was a ruble that they had there. Um, it wasn't. You couldn't go to like Mexico and get some pesos and go to the bank and exchange them for dollars. Nobody would exchange rubles. And there's a very famous story about how Pepsi there was a World Fair, and the representative from Pepsi was at the World Fair, and Khrushchev was there, and he struck a deal that he would send them Pepsi. He beat Coca-Cola to the punch. He sent them Pepsi, and then when the Soviet Union collapsed and they owed, because they would exchange, since there wasn't an exchange of money, they would give them Pepsi for vodka. And so vodka, the only vodka that could be brought in from Russia was through Pepsi. And then when it all collapsed, Soviet Union collapsed, they gave Pepsi part of their navy. And at one point, Pepsi Cola had like the fifth largest navy in the world, submarines and destroyers and all that stuff. Anyway, that's the so it essentially, it's been tried lots of times, but it never works. It always goes down that path. And a lot of these people that tried it, they were diehard socialists, more than a lot of people that are today in academia, I know, pushing it, but it never works. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you can subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.